Teacher Wayne Holt allowed me to teach the class this morning. It is good when I have to be gone and do work elsewhere that we have such great teachers and other ones to fill in the pulpit as well. But I'm very thankful for Wayne, especially, and his really good knowledge of this section of Scripture. And I know you've enjoyed getting to hear from him the last maybe few classes. But we go on. Finishing up the first half of our study of the divided kingdom. Quarter will change next week, so you'll have a different teacher to not have to put up with next week, and I'll be going back in the foundations class. But I want to finish up this section of the divided kingdom today. We're going through the 17 periods of Bible history in all of our classes, of course, and in the midst of the study of the divided kingdom here. We'll continue that next quarter. In today's lesson, we'll be looking at Amaziah's plan against Edom. Amaziah, now the king of Judah, and his resulting idolatry from his success in Edom. And then there's a war between Amaziah in Judah and Jehoash in Israel. And lastly, we'll be looking at Jeroboam II becoming king in Israel as things progress between the two kingdoms. As I mentioned earlier, I like this chart that Wayne had put up a few weeks ago. Kind of gives you an idea of where we are. In the northern kingdom, we have Jehoash. In the southern, Amaziah. So Israel has Jehoash, Amaziah in Judah, and then we'll be looking at Jeroboam II coming to power in the north in today's lesson. So we'll pick up today, we'll start in the reading in 2 Chronicles, chapter 25. I think that gets most of the detail that we'll need. There's not a lot of detail of the thing we're first talking about in 2 Kings. But in 2 Chronicles, chapter 25 and verse 5, Amaziah gathered Judah together and set over them captains of thousands and captains of hundreds, according to their fathers' houses, throughout all Judah and Benjamin. And he numbered them from 20 years old and above, and found them to be 300,000 choice men, able to go to war, who could handle spear and shield. He also hired 100,000 mighty men of valor from Israel for 100 talents of silver. But a man of God came to him, saying, O king, do not let the army of Israel go with you, for the Lord is not with Israel, not with any of the children of Ephraim. But if you go, be gone, be strong in battle. Even so, God shall make you fall before the enemy, for God has power to help and to overthrow. So Amaziah is planning a campaign against Edom. He's getting all his ducks in a row. Amaziah's great-grandfather, Jehoram, during those days, decades ago, Edom had rebelled against Judah's control. You find that in 2 Kings 8 and verse 20. Edom revolted against Judah's authority, that text tells us. So Edom had been out of Judah's control probably now for a little bit of time. Don't know how much problem that was causing them, but enough apparently for Amaziah to feel like he needed to rein them in. So apparently wanting to regain control, what we see in the verses we've just read, is he sees how big his army is, which that's always a good thing to see what your forces are, before you declare war. And he finds that he's got 300,000 men in Judah who can fight. He feels certainly that that's not enough considering the size of armies of those days, so he hires 100,000 mercenaries from Israel with 100 talents of silver. So these were fighting men, apparently not doing much in Israel at this time, so he hires them. You might remember that under Amaziah's great-great-grandfather, Jehoshaphat, Judah's army had numbered 1,160,000. So it was over 3 times larger than it was now, and just 3 generations there. Had been reduced by losses, by here and there to Syrians and incursions from nations around them. So they'd lost quite a few. They'd actually shrunk in size, apparently population-wise, during this time. It indicates, again, that they had suffered significant losses. Well, that no doubt accounts for him feeling like, again, he needed to hire the extra men. And so he does that. We pick up in verse 7 again that God sends an unnamed prophet to Amaziah in verse 7. And he tells him, don't go fight with these Israelites. Don't go fight because God is not with them, and he's not going to be with them if they're fighting with you, and so he's not going to be with you if you have them fighting with you. It's as simple as that. God is not blessing the children of Israel at this time. Obviously, there's a lot of evil going on in the north. They continued with many things that displeased God, and they weren't on God's good side, certainly at this period of time. So this prophet is warning Amaziah, just don't do that. He reminds him in the end of verse 8, and this is maybe a good place to stop and think about something. He reminds him that God will make you fall before the enemy, for God has the power to help and to overthrow. In so much that we've seen in the battles during the divided kingdom time, we've seen that God's in control of all of that. And somebody may have a superior force in every way, in armament and numbers of soldiers and all of that, but God, the victory belongs to God. Over and over again, we've seen the victory belongs to God. And I think that there's still a lot of truth in that. God has sway over the nations. He works all things according to the counsel of his will. And I don't know how much of that he's concerned with nowadays, considering that he has his people in all countries throughout the world. But he does that. He lifts up and he puts down, and he is the one who causes rulers to rule, or allows them to rule, appoints them to rule. In any case, what the prophet is telling Amaziah is God's in control, and you need to be on God's side. So Amaziah obviously has a choice there, and his objection to doing what the prophet tells him to do seems only to be, well, if I do what you say, then what about the 100 talents of silver that I gave to the troops? And as a practical matter, accounting thing, here I paid the guys 100 talents of silver. That's quite a bit. Of course, that's a weight of silver. It'd be a pretty large amount of silver that he'd given to these troops. I've given them this money already. What about that? He obviously doesn't want to ask for it back. That's not going to go over well. The answer comes from the prophet, the Lord is able to give you much more than this. And here again is a second great lesson for us. That is that if we have to suffer loss to do what is right, to be on God's side, God's the one who controls, what we get, our prosperity. He blesses us or doesn't. He's able to abundantly bless us. Don't think in terms of how the business world thinks about profit and loss when you're thinking about your life. Think in terms of, am I storing up treasure in heaven? Am I doing things to please God with what I have? If I have to suffer a loss in order to do the right thing, that's no big deal. God's on my side. And he may or may not allow me to prosper in the future, but he's going to be on my side. He'll provide that which I need, my necessities. And that's the way we have to look at life if we're people who trust God. And that's what this prophet is encouraging Amaziah to do. And so Amaziah shows in this point in his reign seems to show a good bit of faith in the Lord. He trusts what the prophet says. He doesn't believe he'll succeed, apparently, if he goes forth with the Israelite forces. He understands he's going to suffer loss here, but God can replenish that. And so both of those arguments seem to hold sway with Amaziah. We come then down to verse 10, and he discharges the troops. In verse 10, it says, Amaziah discharged the troops that had come to him from Ephraim to go back home. Therefore their anger was greatly aroused against Judah, and they returned home in great anger. Now, to explain that a little bit further, you look at verse 13. As the soldiers of the army which Amaziah had discharged, as for the soldiers of the army which Amaziah had discharged, so that they would not go with him to battle, they raided the cities of Judah from Samaria to Beth Horon and killed 3,000 in them and took much spoil. So this move by Amaziah costs him not only the talents of silver, but also costs him in having part of his nation despoiled by these troops returning home to Israel. Again, you can just see this happening. So what do you think it is that they're mad about? He's paying them their money, it looks like. What do you think these Israelite troops are mad about when they're going back home? Yeah. They're looking for spoil, and that's why they kind of, I think, take it out on Israel and these other towns as they go back home, because they didn't go into battle for the 100 talents of silver. That was just kind of the retainer. They're thinking of, in those days, if you go and you conquer a land, you get all the spoil, you take everything that's from that place. And so that's what they're thinking about. And so kind of to get what they had anticipated they would get, they took some spoil from basically their neighbors and probably even some of their own people as they went back home. So that helps us understand exactly what's going on, what their motivation is. Amaziah then attacks Edom. In verse 11, now backing up to that, Amaziah strengthened himself, and leading his people, he went to the Valley of Salt and killed 10,000 people of Seir. That's Edomite stronghold. Also, the children of Judah took captive 10,000 alive and brought them to the top of the rock and cast them down from the top of the rock so that they all were dashed to pieces. So that's 20,000 that Israel takes. He's victorious, Amaziah is, over Edom, killing the 10,000 in the Valley of Salt. So I just threw this map up here. I'm sure most of us are pretty well aware of this. Here's Judah and basically its boundaries. Israel, basically its boundaries in this time. Edom is down here. They had rebelled. I don't know if they were causing troubles along the border or just that Amaziah didn't like to have them, didn't like it that they weren't under his control. Valley of Salt is right through here. And Amaziah would have led his troops from Jerusalem along this way, and the battle would have been in that area. That all goes really well. But we come to the very next thing that happens, and Amaziah takes a turn for the worse, to say the least. We come to 2 Chronicles chapter 25 and verse 14. It was so after Amaziah came from the slaughter of the Edomites that he brought the gods of the people of Seir, set them up to be his gods, and bowed down to them and burnt incense to them. This is really hard to understand from lots of standpoints. He had followed God's instructions in all that God told him to do regarding going to conquer Edom. He'd been extraordinarily successful. It sounds like it was a very easy victory. They were able to take spoil, obviously, from the land, including these idol gods. So lots to commend obeying God in that experience. And yet, from this point on, it seems like he decides he doesn't want to obey God anymore. Doug? Mm-hmm. Right. Doug's making a great point there that God is so good to Israel all the way through this. And again, as you said, God didn't have to send Amaziah a prophet to tell him how to gain the victory here and be with him in that, but he did. And he would have continued to be with Amaziah had Amaziah continued to be with him. But that's not going to be the case, as we see in the very next verse. For when Amaziah does this and sets up these Edomite gods and bows down before them and burns incense, then in verse 15, the anger of the Lord was aroused against Amaziah, and he sent him a prophet who said to him, "Why have you sought the gods of the people which could not rescue their own people from your hand?" That's a great question. Why in the world would you adopt the gods of the people that you just conquered? These gods couldn't even keep you from conquering them. They're obviously no good, and you have a God who helped you conquer, who gave you directions, and that you were very successful when you followed. I don't know how people think, but in all sincerity, that's not too far different from the way a lot of people in this world think. I mean, you have folks, you're faithful Christians for years, they're living good lives, stable lives, blessed in so many ways, and they just decide, well, we're going out in the world, or we're going out into denominationalism, or whatever it is, even though God has been with us all of this time, and we've had such blessings from Him, and life is wonderful, and we're just going to make our lives rotten by turning our back on God and making our gods the things of the world. And frankly, we say that all the time, don't we? Among people who were once faithful to the Lord, who once followed the Lord. And it doesn't make sense. But the devil deceives people into thinking that what they want is something else. And the grass is always greener kind of thing. That's something like that surely must be what happened to Amaziah. In the next, right. Freddie's making a good point. People today don't think of it as leaving God to serve other gods, but that is, what they're doing is tantamount to that. In fact, that's part of the devil's deception, obviously. We don't see it for what it is. I've had people say that they turn their back on religion because of what they thought about religion. What they did is they turned their back on Jesus, but they want to make it something else other than what it is. So I think that's a point well taken. God continuing to be merciful to Judah and to Amaziah in particular, sends a prophet to him in verse 15. The anger of the Lord was aroused against Amaziah. He sent him a prophet who said, "Why have you sought the gods of the people which could not rescue you from their own people from your hand?" And then verse 16, "So it was, as he talked with him, the king said to him, 'Have we made you the king's counselor? Cease. Why should you be killed?' And the prophet ceased, but he said, 'I know that God has determined to destroy you because you have done this and have not heeded my advice.'" Amaziah shows his pride, his unwillingness to receive rebuke, even from a prophet of God. We don't know if this is the same prophet that had come to him before or not, but nonetheless, he's not going to receive rebuke from this prophet. He doesn't accept it. He doesn't want to hear it. In fact, he tells him to shut up or you'll be killed. The prophet lets him know that God will punish him for this kind of behavior. What we see in Amaziah in his reaction to being rebuked is kind of typical. When people do wrong and they know they've done wrong, but they're going to just continue in doing wrong, they're not going to listen to the rebuke. They like what they've done. They're happy with what they've done, and they're just going to continue in that. It doesn't matter what you say to them that's right, and maybe even that they know is right. They don't want to hear it, especially if they know it's right. They don't want to hear it. And Amaziah shuts that down. Going forward in the story, at this point, Amaziah does something that really opens the door for God to punish him. He felt apparently, and this is just somewhat of an implication. But apparently he felt that he had to respond to how the 100,000 unhappy Israelite mercenaries had returned home. They had, after all, raided some of his land, killed some of his people. The attacks on Judean towns couldn't go unanswered, perhaps is what he's thinking. So Amaziah needs to do something about that. So the next thing that happens then in our text is that he openly challenges Israel, Jehoash, to war. Just basically says, come on, let's have it out. Again, I'm assuming that this is due to what those Israelite the mercenaries from Israelite had done. Pick up the reading in verse 17 with me. Now Amaziah, king of Judah, asked advice and sent to Joash, the son of Jehoahaz, the son of Jehu, king of Israel, saying, come, let us face one another in battle. And Joash, king of Israel, said to Amaziah, king of Judah, sent to Amaziah, king of Judah, saying, the thistle that was in Lebanon sent to the cedar that was in Lebanon, saying, give your daughter to my son as wife. And a wild beast that was in Lebanon passed by and trampled the thistle. Well, that's quite the little parable, quite the illustration. What he's saying is, okay, we've got these two individuals. You're the thistle or the bramble, great cedar. That's how Joash sees himself. You're the thistle, you're the little bramble. And you're saying, give me your wife, you should give me something. And what's going to happen to you is that a wild beast is just going to come trample you. And I suppose that he might be even referring to those mercenaries. They're kind of wild and crazy. I don't know. But basically, you're just going to get stomped on as a result of this. So Joash tells him, verse 19, indeed you say, you have defeated the Edomites, and your heart is lifted up to boast. Stay at home now. Why should you meddle with trouble that you should fall, you and Judah with you? So if you mess with me, you're going down and Judah's going down. And you don't want this. He's trying to talk him out of it. And now for the second time in a row, we find that Amaziah is not somebody you can talk any sense to when he's made up his mind to do something. That's the kind of person that's not going to end well, who can't listen when somebody's trying to help them see the error of their ways. Amaziah certainly doesn't listen. So he's known as the Thistle King, for this, and probably deserves that kind of a title, Amaziah the Thistle King. He doesn't listen, and Judah and Israel face off in battle. Amaziah would not heed, verse 20, for it came from God. So again, God is working here, and the reason that God is working in this way, that he might give them into the hand of their enemies because they sought the gods of Edom. This is Amaziah's punishment for seeking the gods of Edom. It's interesting how God works at times, isn't it? There are points in Israel's history where they take up idol gods and God determines to punish them, but often it's not in that generation immediately at all. Could be a generation or two or three down the line before, but here it's apparently in a very short period of time that Amaziah gets the punishment that was pronounced upon him by the prophet. This is from God. So what happens is, in verse 21, Joash, king of Israel, went out, and he and Amaziah, king of Judah, faced one another at Beth Shemesh, which belongs to Judah. So the battle actually occurs in Judah. And that also is another really bad aspect of Amaziah's leadership. He basically invites Israel to invade Judah. Now, if you want to go against somebody, you really don't want it, where they're going to come into your home territory to take out your people. Maybe on a border would be the best, but basically that's not what happens. Joash leads his forces all the way down to Beth Shemesh, and I'll show you part of that in just a little bit. But anyway, they've come into now the territory of Judah. And Judah was defeated by Israel in verse 22. Every man fled to his tent, so it's a total wipeout. Joash, the king of Israel, captures Amaziah, the king of Judah, the son of Joash, and son of Jehoahaz, and at Beth Shemesh. And he brought him to Jerusalem and broke down the wall of Jerusalem from the gate of Ephraim to the corner gate, 400 cubits. Okay, well, 400 cubits, 600 feet, that's about 2 football fields worth of wall and gate that were broken down from Jerusalem. What's significant about that? Here's your capital city, fortified city of Jerusalem, and now you've got 2 football fields of your wall torn down. You're exposed. You're open to not just Israel, but anybody could come in there, obviously. They're going to have to rebuild that back. But they're definitely exposed. They're greatly weakened by this. It's not something that necessarily Joash is saying, I'm destroying you. He didn't wipe out Jerusalem, but he did, as the saying goes in the Old Testament, he did hamstring an ox. He did make it difficult for them to defend themselves. And that's part of, again, the punishment of God for all of this. He also, Joash takes a good bit of spoil. The text tells us gold and silver that's found both in the temple and the king's palace. It says in verse 24, he took the gold and the silver, all the articles that were found in the house of God with Obed-Edom, the treasures of the king's house, and hostages, and returned to Samaria. So it was a pretty devastating defeat that Judah suffers at this point at the hand of its relatives in Israel. This is the area of Beth Shemesh. It's about 21 miles due west of Jerusalem. And it's kind of typical of that area of the country. There's nothing really unusual about that. You can see a scene like that almost anywhere through there, but that's where it was located. This is a photo that was taken by Leon Malden from there. And he notes on his blog, and talking about this, just the very things that we have just talked about, the reason for this battle and the consequences of it. He says, it was because of Amaziah's idolatry that God orchestrated events to punish Amaziah. Ironically, it was after God had given Amaziah victory in battle against Edom that Amaziah had decided to worship the gods of Edom. So, ironically indeed. From then, after his defeat, we don't really know anything else about, anything else that Amaziah did. About the reign of Jehoash. I'm sorry, after his defeat of Amaziah, nothing else about Jehoash is recorded. And so we're going to go back over to 2 Kings now and look at just a couple of passages there before we wind up. 2 Kings, of course, telling the same stories from a typical focus on what's going on more in the north. The rest of the acts of Jehoash, which he did, it says in 2 Kings 14 and verse 15, the rest of the acts of Jehoash which he did, his might and how he fought with Amaziah, king of Judah, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? So Jehoash rested with his fathers and was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. Then Jeroboam, his son, reigned in his place. So he dies with the kings of Samaria. His son Jeroboam the second becomes king after him. In verses 23 and 24 of 2 Kings 14, now we're skipping down to look at the beginning of the reign of Jeroboam. In the 15th year of Amaziah, the son of Joash, king of Judah, Jeroboam, the son of Jehoash, king of Israel, became king in Samaria and reigned 41 years. So Jeroboam the second has a lengthy reign. We're not told just a whole lot about it, but he does have quite the lengthy reign, and Israel is strengthened during his reign. He did evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who had made Israel sin. So he continues to engage in the calf worship and that sort of idolatry that had been set up in Israel for all this long time. He restored, however, in verse 25, he accomplished a few things. He restored the territory of Israel from the entrance of Hamath to the sea of the Arabah, according to the word of the God of Israel, which he had spoken through his servant Jonah, the son of Amittai, the prophet who is from Gath-hepher. For the Lord saw the affliction of Israel was very bitter, and whether bond or free, there was no helper for Israel. So the Lord does good to Israel and for Israel in the time of Jeroboam II, although he's not particularly a very good king, certainly from a moral standpoint. But he restores a bunch of territory, and we'd studied 3 or 4 lessons ago that a lot of the territory in the Transjordan, where the tribes of Gad and half Manasseh and all that were, a lot of that had been taken from them by the Syrians. But now apparently some of that is restored. The area that's described is from the entrance of Hamath to the Sea of Arabah. So this is that's a lot of territory. He restored territory from the entrance of Hamath to the Sea of Arabah. That is that much territory in the Transjordan. From there to the Sea of Arabah is the Dead Sea. So up on the other side of the Jordan, apparently. The area that we're talking about here's northern. There's Galilee. There's the northern kingdom there. There's Judah. That's their normal territory. But if you talk about during Jeroboam's second's time, he gets access, at least some kind of control over all this territory up here that's really western Syria. So that's a ton of area that he gains access to. And I think 2 things are going on. I think one is Assyria, which is been up and down, is pretty weak during this period of time. It gets stronger at the end of Jeroboam's reign. But right during this time, it's fairly weak. And in fact, we know something that happens to Assyria during this time that kind of tells us something about their weakness and their pulling back from so much violence and evil. The person is mentioned in this text. It was during the days of who? Jonah, the son of Amittai, which is the Jonah that was sent to, what city was he sent to? Nineveh, which is the capital of Assyria. Okay? So that kind of all gets us figuring, that's all going on at the same time frame. Assyria is not the mean, bad nation that it was before or would be again, right during this time. And Syria apparently had weakened. And that probably opens up this territory for both Israel and Judah. And one of the things that we'll see here, if I can get to it, that the Waldrons note about all of this, I'm just going to read some of the text. It's been edited a little bit, but Jeroboam II ruled about 26 years before the reign of Uzziah. During their overlapping rules, approximately 15 years, the territories of Judah and Israel, if combined, would have almost equaled Solomon's empire. That's impressive. That's not really what you'd expect during a time when the divided kingdoms had been not very well pleasing to God. But God is good to them, exceptionally good to them during this time, but it leads them to become rather complacent, even more so than usual, and that leads to the destruction of both of them eventually, especially Israel. One of the factors that made this expansion possible was the decline of the Assyrians. With Assyria weakened, both Israel and Judah were free to grow. God was showing mercy to the 2 little kingdoms in the hopes they would return to him. I think that's true. Israel's prosperity was illusory. That means it's a magic trick. It doesn't look like that. As soon as Jeroboam II died, Israel collapsed like a house of cards. Her end was near. It's chilling to realize Israel went from prosperity of Jeroboam II to utter destruction in only 25 years. Kingdoms can rise and fall very, very rapidly. In the history of the world, they have. Certainly in biblical history, they did. For a kingdom or any nation to hold power for any more than a few decades in world history is a little bit extraordinary. So just a couple of lessons for today. that we've mentioned. There were several actually that we looked at when we went through, but I want to emphasize the problem with Amaziah's pride. It never puts you in a good position with God or men. If you won't listen to human counsel, and certainly if you won't listen to the counsel of God because of your pride, you just want to do what you want to do. His desire to go up against Joash of Israel because, well, I won this battle, and so therefore, and he's pride goes before destruction for sure. It's one of the things that God hates. And the second thing is, and this also relates to his pride, is his unwillingness to receive correction, rebuke, or instruction. How a person receives instruction or correction is a real determiner of success in life. People have to be able to accept that they have done wrong, at least made a mistake, that they're not on the right track. If you can't accept that about yourself when either other people are telling you that or through self-discovery, you are in a really bad way in this life. You will not be successful before God or man most of the time. And so Amaziah refused the sound rebuke of God's prophet, which was plain as day, clear and logical. It's obvious he'd made a huge mistake in worshiping these gods that had just failed the Edomites. It's obvious. And yet he's not willing to admit that. So the scriptures, just repeatedly, of course, throughout, warn us that we're wise if we listen to counsel and rebuke, and we're foolish if we don't. One passage here, let me read to you, and then we'll quit. Proverbs 15:31. The ear that hears the rebukes of the wise will abide among the wise, but he who disdains instruction despises his own soul. He who heeds rebuke gets understanding. That's some really solid lessons from what we've seen today. All right, any other questions or comments anybody want to make before we quit? Thank you for being patient with me this morning, and hopefully we'll go on and finish up the divided kingdom and into Judah alone next quarter.